Well, we're continuing our Mountain Views sermon series, and like I mentioned just a second ago in the prayer, we are climbing Mount Carmel today. But before we get there, I want to tell you about recently the time that I made a pinky promise with Katie Lynn. Now, yesterday we spent about 5 minutes trying to figure out what that promise was, and after some thinking and some wrestling with it, we have no idea what the pinky promise was about. We think it was either about taking the girls to the pool or getting a popsicle after Vacation Bible School this past week. But we don't know. But it's kind of funny, though, because the day that we made the promise, it's all Katie Lynn could talk about until I fulfilled my end of the deal. And I think that's how it goes a lot of times with kids. Kids especially need someone, there's special people in their lives to be trustworthy and dependable. But that need doesn't stop when kids reach a certain age. We all need someone that we can depend on, someone that we can count on who will show up and walk with us or stand with us during the difficult moments. And this isn't just an allegorical good wishes kind of thing. This is backed by research. There's a long-term Harvard study that determined or that discovered that the strongest predictor of happiness in life is not wealth or success. It's having reliable relationships. And that people who feel like they have someone they can depend on are healthier, happier, and more resilient. And then there's a study by the CDC that found that people with strong, dependable relationships are 60% less likely to suffer from depression. And that kids, when they have one steady, trustworthy adult in their lives, they're 5 times more likely to overcome adversity and thrive. See, dependability, someone that you can count on, is not just a nice thing to have, it's a lifeline. And for us today, as we climb atop Mount Carmel, this is the answer of what happens when life pushes us into a corner. Whom and what can we trust and depend on? And we'll see the answer there. And in that spirit, we pick up our story on top of Mount Carmel. It's a mountain range that extends 24 miles in northern Israel. It starts near the Mediterranean Sea and kind of goes from there. But it's a fertile green land in the midst of a bunch of dry land. Its location made it prime for worship, both true worship of Yahweh, but then also pagan worship of the god of fertility and storms, Baal. It was a place that people would go to and they were accustomed to. And for us today, as we think about that day on top of Mount Carmel, the challenge that Elijah had issued still lingers in the air. Stop limping or wavering between God and Baal. Either follow God or follow Baal. The straddling of the fence has to stop. And now there's silence, because all day the prophets of Baal had been shouting, they'd been dancing, they'd been bleeding, they'd been begging their God to show up and light a fire to the altar. And yet there was silence. Nothing happened. Then Elijah, it's his turn. And so he does what any smart person would do. He takes this altar and he drenches it, he soaks it in water, and he builds a trench around it and he fills it with water, because water and fire go so well together. And yet, that's what he does, because he knows who he can depend on, because who he can trust. And so the time came for the evening offering, the evening sacrifice to be made, and he stands up. No theatrics, no singing and dancing, and he confidently cries out to the God of Abraham, of Isaac and Jacob, and he says this: "Answer me, Lord. Answer me so that this people will know you, the Lord, that you are God, and that you have turned their hearts back to him." And in that moment, fire falls down from heaven. leaving no doubt, because the fire doesn't just light the altar, but it consumes the altar, the sacrifice, the stones. It eats up the soil. It licks up the water. There's no doubt in people's minds as God displays his magnificent power in this moment. The only response is for the people to fall down on their face and say, "The Lord, he is God. The Lord, he is God." And as I forgot to mention in the first service, and somebody reminded me to, is after this, Elijah took all the prophets and did away with them. That's kind of the end of the story here, as God's people kind of turn back to him in this moment. But it's this moment that if we look at just this moment on top of Mount Carmel, that we miss a very important aspect of Elijah's life. See, Elijah didn't find his confidence in God on the mountaintop. It was developed and forged in a season of time spent in the valley, walking through suffering and pain and heartache. And so for us, like many of you who are wearing nice jewelry, the jewelry that you're wearing went through this refining process in which all of its impurities were melted away through fire, through the difficulty, the heat of fire. And the same is true for those that God uses. That what happens on the mountaintops in these moments of special God displaying his power through ordinary people, oftentimes it begins in the valley. And that's what he does to Elijah. Before he made his way to Mount Carmel, God invited him into the valley, into a season of brokenness where he would learn what it means to be truly dependent on the God who is trustworthy. Here's going back a couple of chapters. And the word of the Lord came to him. "Depart from here and turn eastward and hide yourself by the brook Kerith," which, by the way, means to cut off or to cut down. The imagery here is of a tree being chopped down at its base and essentially being no more. And that's what God was doing to Elijah. He was eliminating his pride and his self-reliance. In a way, he had to depend on God through ravens to feed him in the morning and in the evening. He did nothing other than wait by the brook for God's next word. And eventually that day came. Because in that season, Elijah had learned that all he had was God and that all he needed was God. And so the brook dried up and God sends him to another place called Zarephath, which is, I actually got a map for us here. So you can see down in the southeast, you have Kerith, and in the northwest, you've got Zarephath, which means, the name comes from the word that means to melt or to smelt, like the way in which jewelry or precious metals are purified. And so Elijah goes from being cut down to being melted. It's another season of difficulty for him, where God sends him to the house of a widow who has nothing, who has barely enough to feed herself, and yet God continues to provide for Elijah one small meal at a time. And what ultimately Elijah is learning here is that he's learning to trust the provider, not the provision. Because God continues to show up, continues to ultimately provide for him and show him that he is the God who is trustworthy through daily, quiet dependence. That even though the methods change, even when God's provision seems small, when instructions seem confusing or his timeline doesn't make sense, Elijah is learning what it means to depend on the God who is trustworthy. And it's in this place that even another level of tragedy and heartache happens, and that the widow's son dies. And Elijah gets blamed for it because this man of God has come and now cast judgment on her. And yet it's through Elijah's prayers that God miraculously brings the son back to life. It's a lesson that he would carry with him to Mount Carmel. Now this kind of trust becomes the foundation of fire from heaven moment that was coming. A moment in which God was fed up with the idolatry and the disobedience and the wickedness of his people, of their hearts going back and forth between him and Baal, of being under the reign of one of the worst kings in Israel's history, King Ahab, who was so wicked and vile. He was the definition of evil, you could say. And he was married to a woman who was even worse, Jezebel. And together they not only encouraged, they sponsored idol worship. Here's how the Bible describes them. And Ahab, the son of Omri, did evil in the sight of the Lord, more than all who were before him. And Ahab made an Asherah, which is a place to worship, an idol itself. Ahab did more to provoke the Lord, the God of Israel, to anger than all the kings of Israel who were before him. And so this is the king to which Elijah is called to challenge, to call out because of his sin and his wickedness. It's no small task, and yet Elijah finds the strength because he knows that the God who called him is the God who has been dependent, the God he can trust on, the God who's going to show up with him in the heat of the moment. And so now we go back to the top of the mountain. The same place, the same crowd, the same altar, and yet perhaps we see it a little bit differently. Because now we know what it took to get there. We saw Elijah hungry. We saw him waiting by a brook. We've seen him dependent on a poor widow with just enough flour for one more meal. We've seen him in the desperate prayers over a dying child. We've seen the call into this moment of what is going to happen standing in front of a wicked king. And now, as we see Elijah, we see that God has been there with him through it all, that he has showed up, that he has provided, that he has sustained, that he has walked with him. And so now as Elijah stands up in confidence, to pray, to cry out to God, God, answer me, and show them that you are the Lord, the one who is calling them back to you. We see that it's not a leap of faith as much as it is a long line of obedience of Elijah. That before God sent the fire from heaven, he was already proving himself faithful in the quiet. We see Elijah trusting the God who is trustworthy, the one who has been dependent and proven himself time and time again. And now for us today, it may not feel like we're standing on top of a mountain. It may feel like we're more stuck in the valley. We're tired, we're stretched thin, we're worn out. We're dealing with thing after thing in our lives that keeps popping up. And I know, personally speaking, that's where our family's been for the past couple weeks. It seems like we've been dealing with urgent and important thing after urgent and important thing, like a car that didn't work here, a leak in our kitchen sink here, some health things, some deadlines, and then all of this is going on in the week before and during VBS. Let's just say we're ready for a break. And yet what we see and what we saw time and time again is that God continues to show up, that God continues to provide just enough to get us into the next day, just enough to get us through and eventually solves problems for us, which is a blessing. But in those seasons when we're in the valley, it's easy for us to lose sight of what God's trying to do, to ask, where's God in this? Can I trust him here with what I'm going through? And for you, maybe it's you're showing up every day at a job that feels meaningless, and you give of your time, you give of your energy, and you don't see any progress being made. You think that maybe God isn't working. But as we look at Elijah, he had a season where his only task was drinking water and being fed by ravens. Or maybe you're like Elijah at Zarephath, watching something die. Your plans, your relationship, your hope, someone that you love. You've prayed, but the answer hasn't come. Now, that doesn't mean that God has abandoned you. It means that you're in the same classroom that Elijah was in, where God teaches us to trust before the fire falls. Or maybe you're where Elijah was when the brook dried up. You did everything right. You did everything that was asked of you, but now the resources are gone. Or you don't know what happened because that door has closed. And yet we're reminded that sometimes God's methods change. And He's leading you into a new way to grow your trust in His provision. And for us, we all want Mount Carmel confidence, but we often forget that it's forged through the long, slow, often hidden seasons where God proves again and again that you can trust me, that I am the one that you can count on to show up and walk with you through this season. See, because God teaches us to trust Him in the valley so that we can stand with confidence on the mountain. And here's how Peter reminds us of this. He says, "Rejoice in this, even though now for a short time you suffer grief in various trials, so that the proven character of your faith, more valuable than gold, which, though perishable, is refined by fire, may result in praise, glory, and honor at the revelation of Jesus Christ." It's this reminder that these things, these seasons, are opportunities for us to ultimately allow God to work through us, to work through our weakness, to demonstrate His power, so that at the end of it, when we make our way through, when we're standing on top of the mountain, it's not us that gets the glory, it's God who gets the glory, the honor, and the praise, because He showed up in a way that only He can deliver. And yet we stand in the confidence knowing that He is the God who can trust, that He is the God that we can trust. And so here is kind of how this all applies to our life today. There's areas, no doubt, in our lives where we're trying to do things on our own, where we're trying to muster up our own strength to navigate, to get through. And so here's the challenge for us today is identify one area in your life where God is trying to teach you to trust Him and then lean in. Where is God saying, hey, it's not about your strength. You're not going to be able to muster up enough strength to solve it, or you might try to rush past it, but in this season, I am trying to teach you something new. I am trying to teach you a deeper level of trust and dependence on me, because I am the one who, when life pushes you back into a corner, that you can count on and you can trust. And so instead of asking God, get me out of this, or God, help me to get through this, we ask God through prayer, God, what are you trying to teach me here? What are you doing in this season so that I can gain the confidence to trust you when the moment comes and I'm standing in this pivotal moment where I just need to call on you in confidence? Maybe it's a relationship. Maybe it's a financial situation. Maybe it's a week with no margin. Or maybe it's a delayed answer to a prayer that's wearing you down. Where is God asking you to trust Him and to lean in? Because ultimately God teaches us to trust Him in the valley so that we can stand with confidence on the mountain. God is shaping you. He is shaping something in you now that you may not fully see until later. The delays, the disruptions, the quiet disappointments. There are these opportunities to remind ourselves that God is the one that we can trust. That they're not the end of the story, because we already know the end of the story, and that is that Christ crucified for us has overcome the world, who has brought us into life with Him both now and forever, and that we get to walk as forgiven and free children of God. And so this morning, and in the week ahead, we can know with confidence that God is the God that we can trust. He is the God who is trustworthy. He's trustworthy in the quiet. He's trustworthy in the fire. And He's trustworthy in everything in between. So my hope and my prayer for us is that in this season, we would just be reminded that when life backs us into a corner, that instead of trying to fight our way out, that we just allow him, the one who is trustworthy, to show up and do something mighty so that he gets the glory, the honor, and the praise. With that, God's peace and strength be with you today and always. Amen.